The NFL draft is the final piece of the prospect puzzle, and now we can put it all together. Jeff Bell, we've got landing spots, we've got draft capital. No longer do we have to pontificate about what we think is going to happen. We finally know, and today we are going to go through our top 50 players in Superflex Dynasty rankings. And Jeff, let's start with the top guy here. No surprise, but who do we have atop our list?
Yeah, we've got Ashton Genty. And I know we did a show like literally a week ago saying that Cam Ward is our number one in Superflex. I don't know about you, but for me, seeing Ashton Genty get a top 6 draft capital landing with the Raiders, we know that Pete Carroll's offenses have fed to the running back. I think that that's where you really just lock him in there at the number one.
And not just Pete Carroll's offense, but Chip Kelly's offenses as well. Like we've seen LaShawn McCoy and other running backs do very well in this offense. So I think that was it, now that we do have, we knew Cam Ward was going 101 to Tennessee, and that made him safer pre-draft. But when you did look at the top 10, there were some potential landmines. We heard that the Jets were potentially interested in Ashton Genty, and if he goes to a backfield with Breece Hall, that wouldn't have been great. The Patriots right now, they've got Ramondre Stevenson over there. They've got a rushing quarterback. That wouldn't have been the best case scenario. But I think him landing at 6, locking in that top 10 draft capital, which puts him in rarefied air. You look at any running back drafted over the last decade inside the top 10, they have all been RB1s in fantasy football. So now we've got the draft capital. We've got the best possible landing spot, in my opinion. I'm with you, Jeff. I also moved him up to 101, but in that same tier. And we can talk, we what we did, as we do on the show often, took my rankings, took Jeff's rankings, averaged them together, and those are the rankings that we're talking about. So I don't know where you draw a line in these tiers, Jeff. I still do have Cam Ward in that top tier. I just have him at 2nd overall. How about you?
I think Ashton Genty, if you're going to put him there, I put Ashton Genty in a tier by himself. I think anytime, I guess I would make the argument that if we're looking at Superflex, if I'm tiering together a quarterback and a running back, then I'm going to have the quarterback in front. And so by putting Ashton Genty in front, I'm saying that there's a tier difference between him and Cam Ward. And then I think Cam Ward kind of sits in this tier with Ted McMillan, with Travis Hunter, with Omarion Hampton, kind of just right there.
So let's talk about that tier a little bit then, because Ted McMillan was quite a riser for you. You've got him now as the 3rd player off the board. Talk me through that a little bit. You're definitely not going to get any pushback from me. I just want to hear your thoughts on this one.
I think locking in that capital too. You've got a top 10 wide receiver. You see him going to Carolina. You know what Dave Canales' offense has meant for wide receivers in the past. Ideally he is going to be the clear number 1 receiver for Bryce Young. I think prior to the draft, there was he was all over the board in terms of where he might have gone.
His over-under was set at 19.5, which essentially means that Vegas expected him to go near pick 20. So for him to go 8, I mean, he far exceeded his expectation.
Yeah, Seattle was sitting there at 18 as a potential team in play for that. You had the Packers. There was a lot of talk about the Packers. Obviously, the Packers took a wide receiver. So landing in some of these places that if later first-round draft capital with a little bit more of a crowd around them relative to landing in Carolina, I mean, Jalen Coker made some plays. I think Xavier Legette was one of the bigger disappointments last year. And so now you have Ted McMillan walking in there, and he should be very heavy volume. And we've seen what Bryce Young has been able to do with Adam Thielen on heavy volume.
Exactly, yeah. And, I talked about it on the live stream that we did on Friday night. A ton of fun. If you've got 5 hours to kill and you want to check that out, you can do so. But talking about Ted McMillan, I said my favorite thing is that it kind of pushes everybody else into better positions. Adam Thielen at this point in his career, he can win outside, he can win in the slot, but he'll likely, the way I imagine this works out is that Ted McMillan is that X receiver in this Canales offense that we saw DK Metcalf in, that we saw Mike Evans in. And then I think out of the slot, we'll see a mix of Adam Thielen and Xavier Legette. Legette hasn't played a ton in the slot, but he does have the physicality that can work there. And then I think Coker getting pushed over to flanker, where he is just going to be running a lot of vertical routes. That's what he does best. So I like that not only is this a good landing spot for Ted, and it helps Bryce Young, but it also puts some other receivers into positions that they're better suited for. Had they not been able to get Ted McMillan, we might have been looking at Jalen Coker playing that X role, and he's not really fit for that. We saw Xavier Legette in that role last year, and he didn't look great in it. So I like this much more than I just like it for Ted McMillan. I think this really just puts a bow on everything that they've been trying to build there in Carolina. We've talked about it a lot this offseason, Jeff, but Bryce Young, still, he was a guy I was trying to target last offseason for cheap. And despite being one of the top scoring quarterbacks towards the end of the fantasy season, value hasn't really bumped up that much. Now that we've got Ted McMillan in the picture, that might change. But if I can go out and get Bryce Young for cheap, I am still trying to do that. Now, sticking in the same tier, we got two other guys that we want to talk about here, Travis Hunter and Omari and Hampton. Let's talk about Travis Hunter first. We've got a slight disparity here in our rankings. I've got him at third overall. You've got him at fifth overall. Talk to me a little bit about Travis Hunter and why you might prefer Ted McMillan ahead of him.
Range of outcomes and probably and potential upside. And I think that when you look at two different things, obviously we know that Travis Hunter is playing with Brian Thomas Jr. now, and Brian Thomas Jr. is looking like he's going to be. There's an argument that he could be the number one receiver in Dynasty overall after this upcoming season. So we know that Travis Hunter, especially if he's playing cornerback, is not going to be the number one receiver on that offense. And so when you're talking about range of outcomes, what's a more realistic range of outcomes for Travis Hunter? Is it playing defense and offense, sitting in the maybe 70 to 80 reception range with 900 to just over 1,000 yards type numbers relative to what's a realistic outcome for Ted McMillan? Could Ted McMillan be one of these 100, 110 catch receivers that are going over 1,500 yards? And so that's where I differentiate Ted McMillan relative to Travis Hunter.
Now, when I see these two wide receivers, I do see complementary skill sets here, and I could see them working very well as a unit. It kind of reminds me a little bit, and maybe this is slightly off base, but it kind of reminds me of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, what we saw in Seattle, where I think that Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be that big play guy. He's got the straight line speed. He's got the big play upside. And Travis Hunter, a shifty route runner, a guy who can do things after the catch. I see him playing a little bit more underneath across the middle of the field. So I do see a world where these guys can coexist and potentially even this symbiotic relationship where they raise each other's ceilings. So I see a guy go second overall who's going to be primarily a wide receiver. Not only did he go second overall, but Jacksonville made a huge swing to move up in the draft to get him. I'd expect that he is going to be the focal point of the offense. Let's just put a percentage on there, Jeff. You think that Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the wide receiver one here. I see a world where Travis Hunter is the wide receiver one here, and it's really tough to imagine exactly how this is going to shake out. If you had to put a percentage on it, what do you think you'd say? I'd say there's about a 60% likelihood that Travis Hunter takes over as the major target earner and the fantasy point scorer here in Jacksonville. How heavily would you say you're leaning towards Brian Thomas Jr. being that guy?
100%. I don't see it.
100%. All
Yeah.
right.
Where did Brian Thomas Jr. finish in yards last year?
Yards, I don't remember. I know he was fifth in touchdowns. I know he was about 20th in target share. Can't remember the yardage though.
He was third in yards.
That was going to be my guess. All right.
In the entire league, behind Jamar
Pretty
Chase and Justin Jefferson.
As a rookie.
Pretty good.
Pretty
good as a rookie. Pretty good. And that's where, again, I mean, you're talking about a player that's going to be playing defense. Travis Hunter, I think it's the most important thing to realize is that Travis Hunter went number 2 because he's going to be playing offense and defense. He didn't go number 2 because I think Ted McMillan is arguably a better receiver than him. And maybe not even arguably. He went number 2 because he's a rare special player who can play 2 blue chip positions at a high level. And that's where the differentiator lies in it. And you're just not going to build an offense when you've got Brian Thomas Jr., who's already, his rookie year was 3rd in the league in yards. You're just not going to build, like, you're not going to sideline that guy for this guy that is spending time in the defensive back room and the receiver room and trying to figure some things out there. I just think it's one ceiling. I think Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, he was misdrafted last year. That was clear as day. We know that now. We saw the testing last year. We knew that. It was that he just didn't have a lot of production lined up to his college profile. And, you're playing with Malik Neighbors. You're not going to get the attention kind of in that situation. So Jacksonville got a steal last year. He breaks out his rookie year, and he shows that translates. And I think that when you look at Liam Cohen's offense, and last year with Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin, they were locked into very specific roles because Mike Evans, and largely because of Mike Evans' limitations, that you're just not going to have Mike Evans running the same types of things that you're going to have Chris Godwin running, whereas Chris Godwin was doing a lot of the after catch things, those types of things, shorter targets. It was his lowest 8 out of his entire career. When I see Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter, I see 2 players that can do both of those things. And so you're going to be alternating those, and that's going to open up Brian Thomas Jr. in some of those catch and run, some of those shorter yardage plays, schemed plays to get the ball in his hands, because we know how explosive he is after the catch. He showcased that over and over again. I think that instead of having 2 receivers locked into their roles, because I mean, as great as Mike Evans is, there's some limitations on what you're able to do with Mike Evans. Now you've got two guys that's wide open on what you can do with them. And that's where you're going to flip it up and moving them around.
So I agree, and I want to say right now too. I mean, we're talking minor differences in rankings here. We both have all of these guys in the same tier. I don't, love Travis Hunter just as much as Jeff doesn't hate Travis Hunter. We're just having a conversation here about how we expect this to shake out because this is where you're putting your premium draft capital. If you got a top 5 pick, you might be choosing between Tet McMillan or Travis Hunter. As much as we like to think we have the answers, we don't. So I would say it's just kind of a personal preference. I think there's upside and downside in drafting either of these, and it's up to you to ultimately make that decision. But we do have one more person in this tier, and we both have them behind Travis Hunter. But I think, if you really, really believe in this guy, you can make the argument to move him up inside this tier ahead of Travis Hunter as well. Omarion Hampton, drafted by the Los Angeles Chargers. Jeff, it really doesn't get better than this. I mean, it is a great landing spot, one of the league's best offensive lines. You've got a quarterback that can attack every level of the field that's going to open up the rushing lanes. Of course, in the short term, in the immediate, Najee Harris is there. So that is going to quell, some of the excitement going into this year, but not for me. I think that they drafted Najee Harris on a cheap 1-year veteran deal. And then when Omarion Hampton fell into their lap, they were just exuberant to draft him. And I think Najee Harris is somebody who kind of gets pushed to the back burner here. That's how I'm expecting this to shake out. Jeff, what do you expect in this backfield for the Los Angeles Chargers in 2025?
Well, I mean, in terms of the fantasy community, isn't pretty certified that Najee Harris is terrible at football. So, is
That's what
any
they say.
excitement going to be quelled at all? I don't think there is going to be. I actually do have Hampton above Travis Hunter in my
Yeah.
rankings right now because I think that when you look at the Chargers, we know the dedication to the run game. Adding Joe Alt last year, having those
Mhm.
bookend tackles, and so you're feeling great about that. What they're going to build long term with that offensive line. It's just that I think this is a player that would it be now granted with the Najee Harris factor, but would it be shocking if in the next 5 years O'Marion Hampton has more rushing yards than Ashton Genty? Because
Not at
I
all.
don't know that it would be. And so that's where I just think it's a very, very high upside situation here. And you're exactly right. They signed Najee Harris how 2 months ago, a month plus ago, versus getting into the draft. And we see it where you sign a player because what did they have under contract at running back? They had nothing. And so
Mhm.
to go out there and you add Najee Harris because it works and it's a short term solution, and then the draft comes around and O'Marion Hampton is sitting there, you're going to take him because you've valued him that way. And it's not a knock on either player that
Right.
they're both ended up there. It's just smart team building because you know the value of running back within your offense.
Yeah, and you look, I mean, it's pretty obvious what they want to do here in Los Angeles. They drafted Omari Hampton in the first round, and then they signed Raheem Sanders as an undrafted free agent. Najee Harris brought in as a free agent this offseason. Hassan Haskins is there from his time with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. All 4 of those running backs, Jeff, are over 6 foot tall and over 220 pounds, all run with that same downhill punishing style. You might see a little, sprinkle of Kamani Vidal here and there, but I mean, really, it's going to be the Omar and Hampton show. Najee Harris is going to come in for drives here and there. I will say, if you look historically, Greg Roman has liked to deploy a committee. It's always this slew of running backs coming in and getting different touches here and there, whether it was Gus Edwards or Justice Hill or J.K. Dobbins. But I don't know if there's ever been a running back that's been under Greg Roman that has the talent level as Omari and Hampton. So I think a lot of the committee approaches that we've seen in the past have been because of the personnel. I think now that they have a guy like Hampton, a blue chip first round prospect, we might see him lean a little bit more towards using him as a workhorse.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yes, I think that long term, especially, it's going to move in that direction and it's going to be very, very good for O'Marion Hampton.
So Jeff, you and I are very similar in the respect that we just stick to our process. We do our rankings and we don't really look at the consensus. And I was kind of surprised. I came out with my rankings on Saturday, and then I started seeing other people's rankings. And the one thing I noticed is that everybody's pretty low on the tight ends. Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren, who both got top 15 capital in the first round. A lot of people are looking at them as late first round picks. I was very happy when I saw your rankings, and you and I are perfectly aligned on this next tier at 6, 7, 8. We have Colson Loveland, Tyler Warren, and Emeka Egbuka. Jeff, talk to me a little bit about why you, and I guess me, we have Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren so high in these rookie rankings?
I mean, you're looking at players that were drafted in the first half of the first round of the NFL draft, and I think probably the consensus that you're pointing at, I imagine, is placing some running backs above them that went in the second round, and that's where maybe some hesitation on people that uh, we've seen tight end busts in the past, but I mean, the last 2 years running, we've seen rookies break tight end records both years. Sam Laporta broke, I think, pretty much every rookie record, and then Brock
Hmm.
Bowers went out and broke just about every NFL record. And so we've seen that back to back years. These tight ends have gotten a lot smarter. Teams have know how to integrate them now. They're becoming bigger parts of their passing games in college, and so they're coming in ready to be comfortable and up and running with that. The tight end position has been emphasized within NFL offenses. And so when you've got Colston Loveland landing with top 10 draft capital and you're matching that up against a running back at round two, I just think you're having two entirely different conversations.
I'm with you. And Jeff, I like to do some historical digging. As I talk about a lot throughout this offseason, I like to learn about these players, know the pros and cons and the scouting reports and all that stuff. But I do tend to lean towards draft capital as a kind of my guiding light in this draft or in this ranking process. And I decided to look back. There have been 7 tight ends prior to this year that have been drafted inside the top 15 over the last 25 years. A lot of numbers I just dropped at you, but 7 tight ends over the last 25 years drafted inside the top 15. Ready for this list, Jeff? Jeremy Shockey, Kellen Winslow II, Vernon Davis, Eric Ebron, TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, Brock Bowers. And then Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren get added to that list. Now, I know you might hear that list and say, like, there's a couple duds in there. Every single one of those players gave us a top 6 tight end season. So if we're looking at the worst case scenario, is Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron had a season where he had 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns in Indianapolis. I mean, like, these are all very good tight ends. And, we might not ever see another Travis Kelce or another George Kittle or another Rob Gronkowski. Those guys might have been unicorns of their time, but you are getting these guys, Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. When we look at the historical comps for them, you're basically guaranteed guys that are just going to be top 10 at their position for the next 5, 10 years.
Yeah, and that's the way I see it as well. I'm a little bit more concerned about Tyler Warren just because the offensive situation we've
Yeah.
seen that Shane Steichen before having Dallas Goddard, so we didn't really use Dallas Goddard there. You're looking at all the wide receivers in Indianapolis with a lower volume passing tree, and that's where I get a little bit nervous on Tyler Warren. Whereas I'm putting my full trust in Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams to be able to deliver with Colston Loveland.
So just to push back a little bit, Dallas Goddard, his 2 best seasons in his career from a yardage standpoint were in those Shane Steichen years. So I think that we haven't seen a good tight end under Shane Steichen since Dallas Goddard. And I would argue that Tyler Warren is a much better tight end. And then you look at the shortcomings of every quarterback in that room is kind of similar, right? When we're looking at Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones and now Riley Leonard, you've got these rushing quarterbacks who aren't going to really attack every level of the field, big arms where they can throw it downfield, but they're going to work on a lot of short stuff. And I see Tyler Warren and Josh Downs as 2 guys that are going to work near the line of scrimmage. They're going to do what they can to scheme up the ball to get them in their hands. And I don't want to set expectations too high, but I could see a Brock Bowers type of rookie season for Tyler Warren, where he is just the wide receiver one here, getting 120 to 150 targets this season.
So Dallas Goddard in 2021, they had Devonta Smith. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who was the wide receiver 2 in that offense?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember. Was it Travis Fulgham?
I mean, maybe for a minute, but I think that was the year before. But it was Quez Watkins and Jalen Rager.
Yeah.
So I
And I think
mean,
he had like 780 yards that year or something.
he had 830 that year.
All right.
The next year it's 702, and I believe that was again
It
just
was
Devonta
21 and
Smith
22 were the years under
in.
Steichen.
Yeah. So I mean, well, that was an AJ Brown year. Okay, so he had 702 with AJ Brown year. They didn't use Quez Watkins was at 354, so it was basically just volume targeted through those 3 players, and that's where I don't know. I think that me personally thinks that Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs and Alec Pierce and maybe Adonai Mitchell is a little bit better than Jalen Rager and Quez Watkins, but that's just me personally.
Probably. But I'd also say that 830 yards and a little bit of touchdown variance breaking in the right direction, that's enough for a top 5 season at tight end. I mean, it's really not that high
Sure.
of a bar, so I think Tyler Warren could definitely get there. These guys are all going to be risky in redraft. I mean, we know how rookies are. They can break out or they could be absolute zero, so buyer beware in redraft, but I think long term, looking at the outlooks for Loveland and Warren, you got to be pretty excited given the investments the teams made in them. The one other guy we want to talk about in this tier, though, Jeff, Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State, was thrilled that he got the draft capital that he did. I think he is such a good player. I think the immediate reaction, I talked about this yesterday on the show with Alfredo Brown when we were talking about our rankings, is that he's kind of this year's Roma Dunze or Jackson Smith Najigba, the guy who was drafted to a team that has two veterans ahead of him. So I think it would make sense for us to temper expectations. That's kind of the immediate gut reaction. But when you look at what the Bucks did last year, despite having all of these injuries at wide receiver, they were still running 11 personnel at one of the league's highest rates. So now that they actually have three good receivers, a healthy Mike Evans, a hopefully healthy Chris Godwin, they've got a Emeka Ibuka there, and they've got Jalen McMillan that they can rotate in. I think we're going to see, somewhere between 80 and 85% of these snaps in Tampa Bay being three wide receiver sets.
Yeah, and I think it's yes. I think you're maybe discounting Jalen McMillan a little bit. I know people are in
Yeah.
shambles because of Jalen McMillan, the tumble. He was Dynasty wide receiver 31 about a month ago, prior to the Chris Godwin contract getting done, and I just shudder to think that there are people out there that bought him at Dynasty wide receiver 31 prices. Now with Chris Godwin locked in there with Emeka Ibuka arriving, I think that you're exactly right on talking about the Jackson Smith and Jigba um, Roma
Roma
Dunze
Dunze.
comp. Yeah, and when you really look at dynasty history here for Jackson Smith and Jigba, he was September 3rd, 2023, beginning of his rookie year. He was wide receiver 11 on Keep Trade Cut. By the a year later, entering 2024, he was wide receiver 34 on Keep Trade Cut.
When
And
people
now
drafted
he's
him, they knew that rookie year was going to be tough. Like, why are we getting this
exactly
swing when that should have been baked into his value to begin with?
because there's no patience. He's back up to wide receiver 11 again. So like basically a 1 year dip in a year that we knew he was stuck
Uh-huh.
behind two players in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett with a set in relationship with Geno Smith there. Obviously, he went from wide receiver 31 to wide receiver 11 to wide receiver 34 back to wide receiver 11. And that's just know that when you make that pick with
Yeah.
Emeka Buka, if he breaks out
You might
rookie
have to take it
year,
out of the chin
that's
that rookie
that's
season.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, understand the investment that you're making, and that's where I hesitate to say maybe pass him and take somebody else, because if you know your league and you play with the type of people that made Jackson Smith and Jigba wide receiver 34 after a year when we knew he probably wouldn't do much, there might be opportunity there to buy Emeka Buka at a lower cost. But I think that in terms of you're exactly right in terms of him being a first round wide receiver and him landing in an offensive scheme there with Baker Mayfield long term. I mean, Mike Evans retires after this year and it's wheels up for Emeka Ibuka. But I think that there is potential there for a very, very similar just roller coaster, bounce up, bounce back. So
Yeah, I'm with you. And as always, level heads prevail in Dynasty. And if you know what you're drafting, you just got to ride out that storm with Igbuka if he doesn't have the best rookie season. And if you can get any opportunity to buy low after year one, I mean, I feel like we're just rehashing the same thing we said 2 years ago about Jackson Smith and Jigwell last year with Roma Dunze.
apparently
But
needs to be said, but I don't
yeah,
know.
and I would bet that if you look at Roma Dunze's value right now on Keep Trade Cut, I'm sure it did a similar just after his rookie season, even though people knew to expect that going into his rookie year. Jeff, I imagine you're looking up Roma Dunze right now.
I am.
We
I'm going
can.
as fast as I possibly can right now. So
All right. Well, I will
here.
just continue to
Yeah,
what's the
so
word I'm looking
he's at
for?
wide receiver 19 now.
And I think he
September
was up
last
to
year,
inside the
wide
top
receiver
10 at one
12.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was May 28th last year after getting drafted, wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12 right after the beginning of the season, wide receiver 19 now. So, yes. And there was a freak out dip like right at the beginning of the year last year. What dropped to wide
And
receiver
then Ben Johnson.
24 at one point, at the very first month of the season. Like that's crazy. Like when you've got you knew you got DJ Moore, you've got Keenan Allen, and you're putting this guy at wide receiver 11 after he's been drafted, after you knew that they had Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, and then after 2 games, you're dropping him to wide receiver 24. It's I don't know. People play Dynasty differently than I do, I guess.
They certainly do. Let's move on to tier 4 here, Jeff. And now our tiers are starting to get a little bit bigger as we're starting to look at some players that we're kind of clumping together here. To start off this tier, though, you and I have two guys that were both pretty big fallers from us compared to where they were getting drafted pre-draft, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And I think this is really where I see the difference between our rankings, which are very, very similar, and the consensus rankings where mine differ from a little bit. This is where I see a lot of people hold on to those pre-draft takes, and I see Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins ahead of Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. And as you said, you're looking at guys who were drafted in the first half of round one, comparing them to guys drafted in round two. I just can't get there. I mean, I've clearly got these guys behind. So let's talk about that a little bit, because Henderson was a guy that was getting some first round buzz. We were, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about the thoughts of him going to Chicago or going to Kansas City or going to Los Angeles, and he landed with the Patriots, where Ramondre Stevenson's on a pretty ironclad contract for the next couple of years. We don't know exactly what Vrabel's tendencies are. We've seen a split backfield with Deion Lewis and Derrick Henry. We also saw 3 or 4 years where he was riding Derrick Henry for 300-plus touches a year. So what do you try to make of the immediate short-term outlook for this Patriots backfield?
Oh, I thought you were going to let me touch the third rail on some things here, but
Go for it. Go, go, go. We can
the
go back to
immediate
the
short
question.
term outcome of the Patriots backfield, my expectation is the coaching staff doesn't like Ramondre Stevenson, and
Yeah.
Antonio Gibson is what Antonio Gibson is at this point, and so my immediate short term outlook is that maybe there's a little bit of a crowd at the beginning of the season, and then you see Travion Henderson step away from that crowd because he is clearly the best player there. And kind of once coaches get comfortable with what he can handle during a game, what his workload might be, once he's up to game speed, once that's kind of going on, then I think that you'll be maybe a Bucky Irving type breakout second half of the year might be kind of a good way to look at that. But I think that there will be and maybe there is the chance that they really just hate Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson is Antonio Gibson and Travion Henderson comes in from day one and just lights it up and he runs away with the job. That's a possibility. But I think that what you'll see is a little bit more of a kind of cautious approach around that. And you've got Josh McDaniel coming back for his third
Yep.
tenure as offensive coordinator. We've seen them lean into committees in the past. So that's the other thing to write off maybe a little bit about last year with the coaching staff and everybody that was around Ramondre Stevenson. They're new this year. And we know Coach Mike Vrabel and McDaniel, they love their pounders. They love those guys that aren't going to get any targets, that are just going to hammer in the middle of the field.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is maybe the exciting argument in a PPR format, that if Travion Henderson is basically the James White role plus maybe
Yep.
because he's a better player than James White, I mean, certainly it's definitely there in PPR.
And Alfredo Brown made that comp, the James White role. He said that on yesterday's show. So I definitely think that that's something worth monitoring. And we've seen that be a very lucrative role, is this pass catching role in New England. I think the major difference here would be that Drake May likes to scramble a little bit more, and he might not check down at the same rate that we saw during the Brady era, but high value touches could certainly be there, and we'll touch on it throughout the show. But I think the Patriots have themselves a really good draft, and everything that they did was to help improve the environment for Drake May. So a big step forward from Drake May, and you're looking at that whole, rising tide lifts all boats, and Travion Henderson would be a part of that. Jeff, do you have something you want to say? I see you smirking.
I do. I do. This is
Let's hear
this
it.
is the
The third
we're
rail.
maybe the third rail here. I think what happens quite a bit in terms of putting out rookie content, in terms of rankings, those types of things, is people will say to themselves or to other people or whatever it might be, basically, I did my evaluation and I've evaluated Travion Henderson to be a better player than Colson Loveland. And they will say that, and they will say, now I can't change that valuation because they were drafted roughly similar and I don't want to look weak on my take. And so I'm going to say that regardless of landing spot, anything else, I believe in the talent of Colson Loveland, not as good as Travion Henderson. And so it doesn't matter where a player landed. That's my rank, and I'm sticking to it. And I think that that's a really silly way to look at things, because I think that you are to do that valuation. One, saying that you're much, much better than NFL teams at evaluating talent is probably not right. Two, looking at that and saying, and without understanding the situation that a player will be playing in, and saying that it doesn't matter, independent of everything, I think he's a better football player, just doesn't bear out. We've seen players again and again, very, very, very talented football players, land in the top 10 with organizations that just can't figure some things out. And it, for whatever reason it might be, their careers don't work out that way. Whereas you can't tell me that if a player was playing with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or something like that, relative to no quarterback at all in Cleveland, that they're going to have the exact same career outcome. I just don't believe that. And so that's where I think it's very, very important to take draft capital into account, and to admit that you probably don't know more than 32 NFL teams that spend literally round the clock looking at these prospects and seeing how they will fit within their offensive scheme. And you need to factor in players that are not in good situations, players that are not,
Mhm.
have not historically been in good situations. These things need to affect your ranks. And I think that even beyond it, to act like there was a massive tier difference between two players, and especially when one of those players went top 10 in the draft and the other player didn't even go round one, is a silly exercise anyways.
And I think that there's balance here, right? Like we do put in the work beforehand. We want to put
Yes.
together our pre-draft rankings. And if you're between a round 5 running back and a round 7 running back, and you said, I really like this guy that went in round 7 and I'm going to stick to my guns there, that's fine. But you can't say that, well, I didn't like RJ Harvey and I like Damian Martinez. And the fact that Damian Martinez went round 7 and RJ Harvey went round 2, I'm going to completely ignore it. That's getting a little too cute with it. So there are some guys, there's a guy right now, as we have talked through all of the first round receivers, and we haven't mentioned one yet. You might be wondering why, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. There are some situations where I will try to think that I'm smarter than NFL teams in a way, but not that egregiously, if you will. Well, I'm teasing a little bit too much. We'll get there eventually. Next guy we talk about after this guy, Quinshon Judkins. Jeff, you and I on lockstep here. We both have him as the 111. So looking at a late first round pick here on Quinshon Judkins. Again, I'm sorry to anybody that listens to the fantasy football show. We are rehashing a lot of the same talking points that I did on yesterday's show with Alfredo Brown. But my fear here is that you look at the running back room right now, and it is Quinshon Judkins, who at Ohio State was very much so the early down guy who got a lot of those touches. And then they'd bring in Travion Henderson, the sparked up guy who would get these third and long and the passing down works. And when I see Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson, Pierre Strong as the second, third, and fourth running back here, I wonder if it's going to be similar deployment for Quinshon Judkins, where he's getting a lot of the early down work and the goal line work, but he seeds a lot of the valuable passing down work. And if that's what we're looking at, is a guy getting early down touches on the Cleveland Browns right now, who are not a necessarily great offense, we could be looking at a lot of volume, but it could be not the most efficient volume and not a lot of touchdowns. And that worries me a little bit for his immediate short term value.
And as somebody that watched the Ohio State Buckeyes religiously last year as part of my football experience and existence, I'm going to say that the situational usage wasn't really like that. It was more, this is a Judkins series, this is a Travion series, and so just kind of trading off, and maybe the usage might have shifted between the two, but it was a lot more. We're going to give Judkins the series, he's going and going that direction, then it definitely was not rotating out on early downs and then passing downs. It was just that made the playbook changed slightly, ever slightly, between the two of them. I didn't pickup, that one was an early down back and one was a pass catching back in the way that they were used last year. But I think Judkins has a little bit more of that pass catching ability than maybe he's kind of written off for. But I do think that when you see what was the frustration with Nick Chubb for the last couple of years, that other than I think that maybe he had 1 year, he just wasn't getting the volume in, especially in the passing game, that he
Mhm.
needed in order to ascend up to the next tier in fantasy football. And that's where Judkins, I think, is locked into there. Yeah, I think you're right there. Basically, I think you're right. I think you got it to the wrong, like came about to the wrong direction, but I think you're at the right end point.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you arrive to the right spot. Yeah, I mean, I like Judkins, a talented player, and I will say, before Ohio State, we saw him much more involved as a pass catcher. It seemed like his pass catching dropped off a little bit after the transfer, but I see the upside here. I just worry about the Browns as a whole and some of the backfield competition there. But we're in lockstep on Judkins. Not too much to talk about there. We have our first big disparity of the show, Jeff. Matthew Golden, you've got him as the 10th pick off the board. I've got him as the 15th pick off the board. Up until this point, we have been within 2 spots of each other on every single player. So I guess it is my turn to justify this pick, why I have a first round player ranked a little bit lower than most other people would probably have him. And I just really get worried about how crowded this wide receiver room is in Green Bay. And it's not just the wide receivers. Of course, there's Jaden Reed there and Romeo Dubs and Dontavian Wicks, but they've also got Tucker Kraft and they've got Luke Musgrave. And I really don't like the too many mouths to feed analogy, because I think that if you are a good enough player, it doesn't matter how many mouths there are to feed. You are going to step up above that crowd. And I just don't know if Matthew Golden has what it takes to step above the rest of the guys. You look at Jaden Reed. He is still a young player who was drafted high in round 2. He's got similar draft capital to Matthew Golden, and he already checked the box of being a good NFL receiver. I think he does a lot of the same things Matthew Golden does, where he can catch short balls and make big plays after the catch. Romeo Dobbs is going to be there as kind of the volume guy who is just working across the middle of the field. Tucker Kraft is going to be involved as well. This one worries me a little bit. When I did my draft grades, this was the only grade that I didn't give a B minus or better to out of the first round. I don't like the fit. I think the pick itself was a little bit of a reach given Matthew Golden's talent. So again, I don't want to sit here and say that I'm smarter than the NFL. I could totally be wrong. There are just a lot of red flags for me with this Matthew Golden selection, and this is one that I think I'm just okay being wrong on because I don't see the sky high ceiling.
And I would say that if Matthew Golden proves himself to be a first round wide receiver one, not one of those players you mentioned matter, to be honest. I think that if you were to put a Puka Nakua or a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase in that Green Bay offense, all those guys you talk about are all backseat, except for maybe Jaden Reed, but his usage is a little bit more schemed up. Romeo Dubs had the weird situation last year towards the end of the year where
Yep.
he was away from the team, and so that probably told them in the Packers' mind that this is not going to be a guy here long term. Christian Watson's out of the picture for the most part. I
Yeah.
mean, if he comes back, it's going to be a good story for him to come back. I think they've tried with Dontavian Wicks, and they kind of know what they're looking at there. And again, the limitations potentially around Jaden Reed, and so that's where if Matthew Golden is a true first round wide receiver, I think the volume is there, no question. I think the big play offense is there within this offensive scheme. I'm just not overly worried about. I think you just named a lot of guys that are on the field that I think when you really stack it up and you look at some of these teams, like look at the Minnesota Vikings having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, like none of those players matter when you've got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. It's just that they've been relevant enough in fantasy football that like we think they're okay-ish, but this is an organization that has been loath to use a number one pick on a wide receiver. They go out and evaluate Matthew Golden as being that guy that they need within their room. And so I'm not concerned at all about volume if Golden is producing the way that he should as a first round pick.
And I do understand. And again, this is what you were just kind of saying, getting on your soapbox, talking about, people like us thinking that we're smarter than the NFL. And I'm sitting here saying, well, I think I'm smarter, but there's just so many red flags with the profile. I mean, I don't think that Matthew Golden is a first round receiver. And I've seen a lot of guys who are better at grinding film than me say that they have similar concerns with Matthew Golden. I think that he got steamed up because of his late season finish after Isaiah Bond was injured. And then after that, there was a little drumbeat about Matthew Golden. And then he comes out and runs fast at the combine. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about him as a first round pick, but he wasn't really getting that type of buzz prior to the combine. And it just feels like he was a guy who was kind of propped up during the prospect cycle. But there's so many things there when I look at Matthew Golden that just don't scream first round receiver to me.
I think that if you go back and you look at it over and over again, when Texas had to have it, Matthew Golden was their guy that they went to. And that says something relative to his talent with Isaiah Bond. Obviously, Isaiah Bond's an entirely different conversation.
Right.
I think there were
We won't talk about today because he's outside of our top 50.
concerns within their offensive scheme with Quinn Ewers' ability at quarterback. I think that was a major part of it. I don't know. I think Matthew Golden is a good, solid football player. And if I'm wrong, then I can be wrong, but I'm still going to use I've got him at my 110. So
on to the next one. We are back in agreement here, Jeff. We both have him at 13. RJ Harvey. This is such a dream landing spot. I think, if he wasn't the age that he is, 24 years old, I'd probably have him even a few spots higher. The only reason I have him down here in round 2 is because of the potential age concerns. But man, you look at what running backs have done in Sean Payton offenses. You look at the offensive line here in Denver. You look at the draft capital that they used on RJ Harvey. I don't know how you aren't just beyond excited. I think you and I are doing a pretty reasonable job here. And I will say Alfredo Brown had him at 13th as well. So BU and Alfredo Brown are completely in lockstep. I've seen some people saying he deserves to be as high as 105, 107. I can't quite get there. But if he's sitting there early in round 2, it's really hard to pass on RJ Harvey.
And to be honest, for me, I think it says more about the players around him, particularly the wide receivers and the fall off of wide receivers. I think I've got him at 13 almost as a default relative to just having some questions and concerns around some of the other day 2 wide receivers, not really having another running back to be like put in that conversation, because some people might have Caleb Johnson in that conversation. I don't know that I'm there. And so I think that it's almost just a default position. I've got Jackson Dart above him, and that pushes him down to 13. I know you don't have Jackson Dart above him. You've got Jaden Higgins there. So we each have our different reasons for pushing him down. But for me, it just kind of falls into, he's almost a placeholder spot. And, if you want to go with one of these wide receivers that went in the second round or day 2 wide receivers, I don't really blame you, but I just don't, lack of better options probably for me on RJ Harvey. But the things that you mentioned with the 105 through 107 picks is insanity. I don't see that.
Yeah. And I think with RJ Harvey, like, you're getting a relatively safe and narrow option here. Like, there's going to be a high floor.
Yes.
I don't think there's going to be a 350 touch ceiling here with RJ Harvey, but a lot of the looks that he probably will give away are going to be more of the low value touches. He might not get the early down work. He might not be pounding between the 20s. That might be Audric Estime or somebody else if they decide to bring in another free agent. But I think RJ Harvey is going to have big play upside. He's going to catch balls, and he's going to be on a high-scoring offense. And those are 3 things that we really like in fantasy football. But let's talk about Jackson Dart. First of all, I've got Dart at 14. You've got him at 12, so there's a huge disparity here. We both have him in the same tier. This was one of those, like, my immediate reaction was kind of, LOL, Jackson Dart, what are they thinking? Traded up for this guy. I slept on it. I woke up the next morning, and I said, you know what? It's what they needed to do. Brian Daboll needs a quarterback that he can try to develop. He's not going to get a job maintain his job, I should say, just with a bridge season from Russell Wilson. So this is what they need to do. I think that Brian Daboll bought himself some extra time. And while I do have a lot of concerns about Jackson Dart, I am very open in saying that I'm not good at evaluating quarterbacks. That is probably one of my biggest weaknesses. So I'm not the biggest fan of Jackson Dart, but I also wasn't the biggest fan of Josh Allen when he came into the league, and I was wrong there. I don't know what's going to happen here, but I think given the draft capital, given the open runway to a starting job, you've got to be looking at Jackson Dart near that 1-2 turn.
What's Jackson Dart's job? Like, what? If you were to tell him one
ball
thing,
into Malik Neighbors' hands.
bingo,
Yes.
exactly. Get the ball to Malik Neighbors. And I have faith that while he might struggle to read the entire field and he might be a one-sided player, I think he can get the ball to Malik Neighbors. And so
And
that's
last year,
where
his job was to get the ball to Trey Harris, and he did that pretty well.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you've got a first round pick on a quarterback in the Superflex format, and he's playing with Malik Neighbors, and his only job is just get the ball to Malik Neighbors.
Let's move on to the next guy because we don't need to talk about Jackson Dart too much. I think we're pretty much in lockstep there. Might not play at all this year, might get a handful of starts late in the season. But either way, I think if you're drafting Jackson Dart, you're hoping that he can develop into a good long term quarterback. You're not drafting him saying, I hope this can be my week one super flex option. So if you do have Jackson Dart, hopefully you've got some other options going into week one. But I don't know. Let me ask you, Jeff. I'm just saying that matter of factly. I don't know. Do you think there's a chance Jackson Dart starts week one, or do you think it's going to be Wilson's job out the gate?
I would expect Russell Wilson to be the week one starter unless Russell Wilson's just not on the team. I think if it gets into the situation where Jackson Dart is going to be the week one starter, Russell Wilson's not going to be a Giant or
Yeah.
Russell Wilson's not available, basically.
Get ready to go back to Pittsburgh, Russ, because that might be where you are if Jackson Dart
Yeah.
steps up in camp. All right, we got two guys left in this tier, Jeff, and little disparities with each of these guys here. Luther Burden, you've got him at 16. I've got him at 12. Big fan of Luther Burden. I don't know how in the heck he is going to fit into this Chicago offense. They have an embarrassment of riches right now when it comes to pass catchers, but they drafted him and they said they had a high first round grade on him. I think they wanted Travion Henderson and Quinton Judkins, and they went in the 3 picks before Chicago was on the clock at 39. They both went off the board, and I think they just said, well, best player available, Luther Burden, we'll figure it out down the road. And I think that's kind of what happened here. So not crazy about the immediate landing spot, but man, you think about a gadgety, sparked up, athletic guy like Luther Burden underneath Ben Johnson. It is really easy to see the ceiling outcome for him.
We've all been there in a draft, in a
Yes.
rookie draft, where
I just took Terrence
and
Ferguson as my tight
you
end
know,
5 in a rookie draft.
and as a Bears fan, they openly coveted Travion Henderson. They wanted him
Mhm.
desperately bad, and to see him go off the board right before their pick, that is the my go to is I have a lot of meetings at work. Meetings come up during rookie drafts, and I'm going to go into a meeting and I might evaluate offers if on any offers come in. But when you're on a 5-minute clock on night two, you can't walk into a meeting and see if
Yeah.
anything comes up. And when that phone is not ringing, and you had everything circled that Travion Henderson was going to be your pick, you got to pick something. And I feel like that's where Luther Burden came in there. I think part of it certainly a factor of sending a message. I mean, Ben
Yep.
Johnson today kind of addressed it as such, or this weekend addressed it as such, that there was a level of sending a message to one DJ Moore to basically you can be replaced.
I didn't say
But
him by
I think
name. I will say he never said DJ Moore by name, but a very not so thinly veiled message about DJ
yeah,
Moore. Yes.
yeah, and I think that there's it's just a massive range of outcomes here with Luther Burden landing here, because he could be the Amon-Ra St. Brown of this offense, or he could be Khalif Raymond plus, basically, and so that's just a huge range where this could end up. But
He could also be his high school teammate, Jamison Williams. He's got that straight line speed too.
yeah,
There's a lot of different things Luther Burden can be. I guess we'll find out here. Are you buying into the possible maybe now they'll try to trade DJ Moore talk, or do you think that they're just going to go into the season with Colson Loveland, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, and now Luther Burden? Do you think that they're just going to be content going into the season with that whole slew of guys?
I would expect to go into the season with that slew of guys, unless it really, unless DJ Moore sees the comments and really kind of amps it up a little bit because he does want to be traded. That gives you the out now if you want to explore that. But right now, the only thing that matters is making sure that you have a successful season for Caleb Williams, and having talent around Caleb Williams is the most important thing. And so doing that, and it just opens up that possibility that having all those weapons around Caleb Williams and that first year with Ben Johnson, getting him comfortable, getting him up to speed, and then if it works and Caleb Williams is great, you feel a whole lot better about exploring trades for DJ Moore because you feel like Caleb Williams has clicked. It's there. Now we can slide Luther Burden into a larger spot
Right.
here, and DJ Moore can be traded. But right now, with the impetus on making sure that DJ Moore is that successful quarterback, you're not going to trade your number one option prior to the season unless it just becomes an untenable situation.
And it's still so early here in April. We don't know what ADP is going to look like by the time fantasy football season rolls around. And obviously, this is a dynasty show. But when it comes to fantasy, if you're drafting that, it's going to be so hard to decide which of these pass catchers to choose in Chicago and even Green Bay, like we were talking about earlier with Matthew Golden. I think my default is going to be draft Caleb Williams and draft Jordan Love. If there's too many playmakers for them all to eat, get the guy that's cooking and out there making these meals. Last guy in this tier, Jeff, and this is the biggest disparity we've had so far, and a pretty sizable one at that. Jaden Higgins was a guy that I loved early on in the draft process, and then I started kind of moving him down to make room for other guys that I liked more. Trey Harris, Jalen Noel, Luther Burden. But man, the draft capital and the landing spot, I love it. He went to Houston, second pick of round 2. I have moved him up to 109. I've got him as my 9th player overall. You've got him at the 207, so 10 spots below. Talk to me a little bit about Jaden Higgins, because maybe I need some cold water splashed on me here.
One, we know who CJ Stroud's wide receiver 1 is going to be. We know it's going to be Nico Collins. We know that relationship there has already been established. We've seen Nico Collins as a high upside playmaker. So that's a consideration. I think that, and granted, it was a different offensive coordinator, but same head coach, same general manager. I think the selection of Jalen Noel in round 3 kind of threw a little bit of cold water for me on Jaden Higgins. That selection in the trade for Christian Kirk, the questions around Tank Dell. To me, when you followed that up with Noel in the next round, that changed the conversation from, we really love Jaden Higgins, we think that he's going to be our wide receiver 2 long-term in this offense, to when Nico Collins was out last year, we had nothing going on within this offense, and we need to make sure we have options. And we liked Jaden Higgins the best. We had the pick here. We traded down in round 1. We were happy making this pick. I think one of the biggest things that I believe in, once you get to like pick 20, pick 18 even, everything beyond then is not really that different than pick 45 or pick 50 even. Like, you're kind of operating in a similar tier. You take Jaden Higgins at that spot because you have the pick at that spot and because that's the receiver that you wanted, but you followed up with Jalen Noel, and then you start accumulating darts. You followed up with, you already had Christian Kirk. You're hoping Tank Dell comes back. It becomes less, we think that this guy is the long-term wide receiver 2 in this offense, and more, we were absolutely screwed last year when we had John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson and nothing else, and we need to get CJ Stroud back on track.
I agree with a lot of those points. I think my only pushback here would be that even if Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1, which I agree with you, I think that he will be the wide receiver 1. Think about the narrative we hear all the time, and not narrative, I mean, there's numbers to back this up, is that quarterbacks as rookies cannot support multiple pass catchers. We always see these rookies kind of hyper targeting one guy, and that was kind of the fear with CJ Stroud when he was a rookie. As a rookie, before Tank Dell got injured, they were both top 10 fantasy wide receivers. I mean, we saw CJ Stroud doing this as a rookie. When he had 2 healthy and talented wide receivers, he turned them both into fantasy wide receiver 1s. So I can see something similar here. And last year, you talk about it, the injuries to the wide receivers, the offensive line, it was terrible, but they've made a lot of investments in the offense this year. And I could see Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins are 2 similar players. Like, they're big bodied guys who really do well with contested catches and making plays after the catch. It wouldn't surprise me if we see CJ Stroud return to the guy that he was as a rookie, throw for 4,500 plus yards, and turn out 2, top 10, top 15, maybe top 20 wide receivers in this offense.
Who had the third most? Sorry, who's the wide receiver 3 when
Last year,
Tank Dell and Nico Collins did all those good things?
I believe it was Xavier Hutchinson, perhaps, or was it Robert Woods? Robert
It was
Woods.
Robert Woods, Noah Brown,
Yeah.
John
Hey, Noah
Mechie.
Brown's no slouch. Put some respect on Noah Brown and Robert Woods. They might have been a little bit older, but And what do they have now? I mean, Jalen Noel is the third. Christian Kirk. I don't know if we're ever going to see Jalen Noel and Christian Kirk on the field at the same time. I see them kind of playing the same role where they'll be coming in and out of the slot. I think Higgins and Nico Collins are the two guys that are just going to be on the field for every offensive snap.
I think Nico's going to be on the field for every snap. I think Higgins moves through and rotates kind of with some of those other guys, I guess is the way I see it. And that just difference probably there. And I don't disagree with you. And certainly Stroud has that upside. And yeah, if Higgins is the wide receiver 2 in this offense long term, then yeah, absolutely. You're right on where you're evaluating him. I just think it's more of a crowd maybe than a clear wide receiver 2.
And this is why we make our miniature consensus, because if you were just listening to me, you'd spend your 109 on Jaden Higgins. And if you were listening to Jeff, you'd wait till 207 and you wouldn't get Jaden Higgins. So we are telling you here with our consensus, get him somewhere in, the top to middle of round 2. 203 is where we settled on him together. And Jeff, I think we could both agree. I might be a little too high. You might be a little bit too low, but 203, 204, that's a pretty fair spot to take a shot at Jaden Higgins, right?
Yes, I absolutely think that's a good spot for that.
And that's why we do tiers as well. Like we've got him at the bottom of the tier, but he could be a little bit higher in that tier. This is why we do that. On to tier 5, Jeff. At this point, we are making our way into the middle of round 2. We've got Trey Harris atop this one, and this is a guy that I've talked about a ton this offseason on this show, on the fantasy show, and basically on every single show that I've guested on since February. Huge fan of Trey Harris, huge fan of this landing spot. We don't have any major disagreements here. I've got him at 16. You've got him at 17. He slots in as our consensus 16th best player. Talk to me a little bit about the range of outcomes here. Do you think that he's going to be an immediate contributor? Do you think he could ever usurp the wide receiver 1 role from Ladd McConkey? Do you think that he takes over Quentin Johnston? Does he play more the Mike Williams role? There's so many ways to look at this range of outcomes. I've talked enough about Trey Harris. I want to hear your thoughts here, Jeff.
So making what you've talked about there kind of plays into my concern on Jaden Higgins, because when I look at Jaden Higgins and I look at Nico Collins, I feel like they operate in similar areas of the field. When I look at the Chargers wide receiver core with Trey Harris coming in there, you talked about it, where he could be operated in just these different areas of the field and become kind of fit in long term. I feel like Ladd McConkey and Trey Harris are more complementary players than Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins are. And so that's where I'm valuing Trey Harris as being a clear complementary player to Ladd McConkey as long term, potentially Justin Herbert's wide receiver 2. It's me, the only one on the island of Quentin Johnston is not the worst player to play in the NFL. So I think that he's still going to have a role, and they've figured out maybe what that role should look like. And then, Mike Williams, I mean, if he bounces back, that's great. That if he bounces back, it's just that he was so lost last year that I don't know he can have any level of faith in that. And so that's where I see Harris being a little bit more complimentary to Ladd McConkey as the wide receiver 1 there, relative to Higgins and Collins having a level of overlap that concerns me.
Now, when I see Trey Harris, I think that if you kind of took the best skills from Quentin Johnston and you took the best skills from Mike Williams and you put them in a pot together, you'd kind of come up with Trey Harris. Like he's got the after the catch abilities of Quentin Johnston and he's got the contested catch and downfield abilities of Mike Williams. So I see this being long term, assuming that this receiver core here is going to be Ladd McConkey, Trey Harris, and Quentin Johnston. There's some questions when it comes to the limitations of Quentin Johnson, and I think a lot of people have similar questions about Trey Harris right now. But I think that the way that they all work off of each other and the things that they can do and the strengths that they have, I see this being a very cohesive unit that can do a lot of fun things in the long term when you've got Justin Herbert with his arm, his ability to fit balls into tight windows, and then the run game that's just going to open up even more for the pass. I feel like I sip the Kool-Aid with the Los Angeles Chargers a lot, and it doesn't always end well, but man, I love what they're doing this offseason. Now going into the second year with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, Justin Herbert is finally healthy after dealing with that ankle injury going into last year. I am very, very, very excited for this Chargers offense, and I think Trey Harris is going to be an immediate big part of it.
I agree.
All right, Jeff, on to your guy. Kyle Williams. This was another great call by you. I am going to W the Kyle Williams guy of the industry because I did hear some other people start talking about him as we got closer to the draft. But man, you've been on this guy for a long, long time, and he got second round draft capital, which we love to see. I
Third
think when
round,
you
but it was like right at the beginning of round
oh,
3.
you're right,
So
you're right. It was round 3. You're right. I think when you look at the depth chart, though, Stephon Diggs is there, coming off the ACL tear, and very much so on the wrong side of the age curve. And I know you like to laugh about this one. Um, I think it was smart for them to get Stephon Diggs. You know, they needed to do something.
yeah,
They couldn't go out there with Keyshawn Booty and Jalen Polk and Hunter Henry and try to run it back next year. But I see Kyle Williams. I don't want to say a player comp, but there are a lot of similarities to the things that Kyle Williams does and the things that Stephon Diggs does.
I think that's fair. I think that you're exactly right on adding Stephon Diggs at $60 million. Yeah, that I think that's humorous to me personally. But I think that there are overlaps. But what I see even bigger than that is what receivers
25
have.
million guaranteed. I do want to point. I had to look it up. 25 million guaranteed. It's not that bad for Stephon Diggs. 60 million though is a funny number.
Age, I think, was it age like, isn't it like age 32
31.
season, age 31 season? So off an
Yeah,
ACL,
he's going into his 32. Yeah, going into his age 32 season.
off an
Yep.
ACL.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that really kind of when you look at it, the what wide receivers have excelled in Josh McDaniel's offense, it's been these shiftier guys, these smaller guys, and so that's where Kyle Williams fits that to a T. And that's where, I mean, Stephon Diggs is that, yes, but I think that when you line them up with Demario Douglas as well, you're getting guys that Josh McDaniel has traditionally found comfort with. And so I think that when you look at really kind of, I mean, maybe Demario Douglas is that guy, or maybe Stephon Diggs does find the fountain of youth and recovers from the ACL. I think there's a great chance that Kyle Williams is basically like the Julian Edelman type within this offensive scheme for Drake May as that safety security blanket, that guy that can get open quickly, that is going to just get hammered with volume. And that's where I'm excited about this landing spot, because as all these players that we talked about, I mean, Jaden Higgins, we know, I mean, unless like it just pops out of nowhere, basically, we know Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1. Trey Harris, I'm very skeptical he's going to pass Ladd McConkey as the wide receiver 1. Kyle Williams can lock in here as Drake May's wide receiver 1 and have a very, very high range of outcomes for, and especially in PPR formats.
Yeah, I'm with you. This is a fun pick, and I think this is about where he's going to end up landing ADP wise, kind of in that top half of round 2, and absolutely worth the upside there as a guy that could be Drake May's long term wide receiver 1. Jeff, we've got another little disparity here. Nothing huge, but you are quite a bit higher on Mason Taylor than I am. I have him at 21st overall. You have him at 14th overall. Talk to me about why you are so high on Mason Taylor, a guy both of us really, really liked. He landed in round 2 with the New York Jets. I kind of have all of these tight ends. They went together within 8 picks of the draft. It was Mason Taylor, then Terrence Ferguson, and then Elijah Arroyo. I've got them clumped together a little bit tighter, but you are really taking a stance here saying that Mason Taylor is the tight end in this round 2 that you want.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes back to what we saw the Bears offense look like with Justin Fields at quarterback when they had DJ Moore, they had Cole Kmet, and it was just a whole bunch of guys. And
Mhm.
that's basically the Jets right now with Garrett Wilson, with Mason Taylor, and then just odds and ends. I mean, it's going to be Arian Smith, who they took very early in round 4, who's just kind of a
Alan
straight line
Lazard,
burner. Is it going to be Alan Lazard, who is
Malachi
better at
Corley.
blocking guys? Is it going to be Malachi Corley, who doesn't actually know how to play wide receiver? That's where I think that there's a lot of volume to be had for Mason Taylor if he can lock down this tight end 1 role, and he doesn't. Despite the relationship with Jeremy Ruckert here, there's not a lot of competition for Mason Taylor to not be that guy that locks in the number 1 role as tight end on the Jets and really the number 2 target within this offense. And you're talking about a our friend Andrew Cooper talks about it all the time, that if you get these tight ends that are top 2 target on their team, that's when you really can find fantasy gold. And I think that Mason Taylor strikes that profile. You can certainly be concerned about Justin Fields' ability to support him as a tight end, but Cole Kmet had some windows there, and I think ultimately Mason Taylor is probably a better football player than Cole Kmet. And so kind of making that bet there on him being the number 2 target option for the Jets, I think that can give you a lot of value at tight end.
Caleb Johnson, you've got him at 22. I've got him at 17. I got to be honest, I wanted to move him down a little bit further. And I like that you were pushing him down a little bit because I see round 3 draft capital. I see him going to a team that doesn't really look like they're going to score a lot of points. And I see Jalen Warren there where he's going to cede a lot of his high value touches. So I agree with your ranking being a little bit lower on him. But talk to me about Caleb Johnson and maybe why you're tempering expectations more than consensus. Because I see a lot of people still saying that he's worth a late first round pick in rookie drafts or an early second round pick in rookie drafts. You and I both have him at the end of round 2.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's for me, it's less about Caleb Johnson. It's more about the players around him. And so I've got Jack Besh ahead of him. We saw him go off the board in day 3. I think that it lines up very, very well for him to be the wide receiver 2, nominal target order 3 for the Raiders. Or you've got Tyler Shuck that went in round 2 that could be the Saints starting quarterback. And so in Superflex, I'm going to bet on a potential starting quarterback there. And Terrence Ferguson at 21, right above Caleb Johnson, who should be the Rams tight end, if not this year, at least long term. And so kind of just the way rankings are built, it's not to say that I'm down on Caleb Johnson. It's just that I like where some of the other guys relative to his value ended up landing. And so, I mean, the league kind of said what they thought about Caleb Johnson. I think that for all the excitement and there were legitimate people who I think are very, very smart and do excellent work who thought he was a 4.35 player and he was closer to a 4.55 player. It's just that where were you doing with Najee Harris last year? And Najee Harris was our comp to Caleb Johnson in the
He's been
rookie guide.
Najee Harris was a per game RB3 in back-to-back seasons. And if we're
Yeah.
dropping Caleb Johnson in there, sure, maybe he has the home run upside that Najee Harris didn't. I don't think he does. So I think we're really going to be looking, what we saw from Najee Harris over the last few years. You drop Caleb Johnson right into that spot, and I think you could look at the same exact usage on what's probably going to be a worse Steelers team than it's been over the last few years.
Yeah, and I would argue that he's nowhere near the pass catcher that Najee Harris was, and
Right.
the passing offense for the Steelers, unless one Aaron Rodgers joins the team very, very soon, is nowhere near where it's been the last couple of years.
Talk to me about Jack Bash because you mentioned his name and you said that you have him ahead of Caleb Johnson. And I got to be honest, I like that take. I've got him 2 spots below Caleb Johnson, but the more I think about it, man, I see a path where Jack Bash, he could be the wide receiver 1 behind Brock Bowers, of course, but I could see him quickly jumping ahead of Jacoby Myers and being a guy that could be a stalwart in that Raiders offense.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical on him jumping Jacoby Myers at least quickly in the short term. Long term, absolutely, and I think that that's certainly in play. It's more jumping Trey Tucker probably right now, and outside of Trey Tucker, can you name another Raiders wide receiver, Dave, outside of Trey Tucker? Yeah, it's basically like
Why
Kyle
not?
Phillips is like the best option there. So it's wide open and they added Dante Thornton. So, maybe he is
Oh, true.
the
Yeah.
Darius Hayward Bay that never was, but that's where I think you're looking at Besh as immediately kind of being at wide receiver 2, again, nominal target earner 3 within that scheme. I mean, Trey Tucker can do some decent things on the field, but I think that taking Besh where they took him, they obviously like him. And that's, I'm the lone supporter of the Jacoby Myers fan club, it feels like at times, but Jacoby Myers has played some really good football over the last couple of years. But long term, Besh can definitely step in there as the number 2 target behind Brock Bowers.
And can't scoff at that day 2 draft capital. They clearly like him. That is meaningful investments in a wide receiver. We got 2 guys left in this tier. Tyler Shuck, we got to talk about him real quickly because Nick Underhill, who reports on the Saints, does a good job over there. he said that he's going to be the week one starter there. So I know he's an older prospect. I don't think everybody has the highest grade on Tyler Shuck, but you look at the draft capital, and all of a sudden you're going, well, he's going to be the week one starter, and it's a super flex league. And the guy he's replacing, another round two pick, was a starter for nearly a decade in the league. Maybe Tyler Shuck could follow a similar path.
And what happens if he is that starter and say he goes out week one and just lights it up with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and Alvin Kamara and looks good week one, the first couple weeks of the season? Where do you think his dynasty value is going
Oh,
to
it's
be if that's the case?
skyrocketing, and like he'll be a top 10 QB by week 4 if he puts it together in this offense. Because outside of the top 5 or 6, we know how fluid the rest of the quarterback market is in Dynasty.
Yes, and there's certainly various levels of risk there, but talking about range of outcomes, I think when you're dealing within this tier, this level, there's no player that has the potential ability to skyrocket value as quickly as Tyler Shuck does.
Last guy in here, and we've mentioned his name a couple of times throughout the show. Terrence Ferguson landed with early round 2 draft capital going to the Los Angeles Rams. Of course, Puka Nacua is there. Devontae Adams is there. The path to immediate production is pretty hard to envision, but it's hard not to get excited about the long-term outlook for a guy like Terrence Ferguson, who really he might even see the field quite a bit as a rookie. Not the best blocker, and I think that he's one of those guys that could immediately work as kind of the power slot in this offense where you've got Puka and Devontae Adams on the outside. Ferguson can line up in what wouldn't be 11 personnel, but kind of playing as their third wide receiver. So, third on the pecking order, probably not the best possible outcome, but we have seen little stints where Matt Stafford is supporting 3 or 4 pass catchers, and Kyron Williams is still getting his. When this Rams offense is on, there's a lot of points in production to be scored here. So, short term outlook for Ferguson is probably a little bit shaky, but long term, I don't know how you can't get excited about this draft capital in the Sean McVay offense.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. They've wanted to lock down this position. There was all the talk about wanting Brock Bowers, and I think that probably a little bit more to do with them recognizing how good Brock Bowers was relative to just we need a tight end, but
Hmm.
they've needed a tight end. I mean, Tyler Higbee's been very questionable on his status availability. I mean, they elected Davis Allen, that didn't really work all that well. They had the random guy from the Dolphins, Hunter Long, was
Yes.
in there last year too, and they were just kind of rotating tight ends, and largely because they just didn't feel comfortable with one of them, and that's where Ferguson definitely long term. You're exactly right, can lock down that position.
All right, the next tier that we have here, Jeff, we've got 5 players and we're getting pretty deep into the show, so we don't need to sit here and discuss every single one. What I'm going to ask you to do is out of these 5 players, tell me who is your favorite player to target. Cam Scatabo, running back who landed with the New York Giants. Bayshaw Tootin, running back, landed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jalen Milrow, quarterback, drafted in round 3 to the Seattle Seahawks. Elijah Arroyo, also drafted to the Seahawks as a tight end. And then Jalen Knoll, who we talked about a little bit earlier, when the Houston Texans, after drafting Jaden Higgins in round 2, came back in round 3 and added Jalen Knoll. Out of these 5, who is the one guy that you see yourself targeting most frequently?
Well, I'm going to ignore your question. I'm going to ask you a question because between Cam Scatabo and Caleb Johnson, what's the difference? And when
Half
you're
a
looking at
round?
those two players, looking at those two players though,
Yeah.
who would you really rather have? I mean, in their situations.
I think
Well, I know
Caleb Johnson.
You're the Tyrone Tracy flag bearer,
I
so I'm
am.
asking the wrong
I
person's
am. I
question.
am.
But
And I do like Tomlin's willingness to establish the run a little bit. I see Dable every once in a while gets in his own head and just forgets that they can run the ball. So I think I'd lean towards Caleb Johnson, but I'm picking up what you're selling. I get what you're saying. Cam Scatavo got a really nice landing spot.
yeah, and so now I will actually be the good number two on this show, and I will actually answer your question. Looking
It's
at
Jalen
this
Milrow,
year,
isn't it?
well, I think it's the Seattle connection here. I think that it's Elijah Arroyo landing in round 2. I think that I got him at the 401 in a draft that we did days before the draft. And so landing in the
Crazy.
second round, pretty thrilled at that. And you might look at it and say, well, they've got Noah Fant. He's never really done anything. But, and then they also have AJ Barner, who's kind of a breakout last year. I think you're going to see them shift to two tight ends, 12 personnel as their base offense, with the departure of DK Metcalf, bringing Cooper Kupp in there, the departure of Tyler Lockett as well. So you've got two tight ends on the field there. They can play a little bit heavier power run game, and Elijah Arroyo kind of be that Mark Andrews within this offensive scheme. And then Milrow on top of that. So if you're playing that two tight end, 12 personnel, run heavy scheme, and then you're putting the addressed offensive line as well, adding Gray Zabel to kind of lock their interior, and you're going to put Jalen Milrow into any kind of offense, uh, putting him into a power run, two tight end, and allowing him to create with his running game feels like the
Hmm.
optimum offense that I would want to put him into. And so I think that these are two symbiotic pieces. And overall, I think the Seahawks had one of my favorite drafts because you could see
Yeah.
the DNA of Mike McDonald wanting to put in that Ravens DNA and kind of getting Nick Amanwari at the beginning
Yep.
of the second round, kind of as that Kyle Hamilton type safety potentially, and then adding Elijah Arroyo as your potential Mark Andrews, and Jalen Milrow as, gosh, God forbid, but your potential Lamar Jackson here, and you can kind of see the direction that they're leaning and thinking that they might be able to take this thing.
And we'll talk about him because he's in this next year. But Torrey Horton, fell all the way deep down into day three. Perhaps those medicals that got him to fall. But when you look at the two number one guys in this offense right now, Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith Jigba, two guys that are slots, they don't really have a prototypical X receiver. And Torrey Horton can play that role. So even though he was a day three pick, am I just holding on to my pre-draft priors here, Jeff, by saying that Torrey Horton might be a better wide receiver than Marquez Valdez-Scantling and could actually end up winning a starting job?
Well,
Probably,
you're
right?
getting ahead of yourself saying that wide receiver three is a starting job because it's going to be Jackson Smith and
Well,
Jigba, Cooper Kupp, and
starting
two
job.
tight ends. So there you go.
Fair. All right. There you go. 12 personnel. All right. Going to talk about this last tier, Jeff. And there's a lot of guys in here. I'm going to list them all off. Same question. Tell me which one is your favorite to draft. Woody Marks, running back in Houston. Trevor Etienne, running back in Carolina. Harold Fannin, tight end in Cleveland. Jaden Blue, running back in Dallas. Taj Brooks, a running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. Jarquez Hunter went to the Los Angeles Rams. Isaac Tisla went to the Detroit Lions. Ty Felton to the Vikings. Savion Williams to the Packers. Ollie Gordon to the Dolphins. Dylan Sampson to the Browns. Pat Bryant to the Broncos. DJ Giddens to the Colts. Dylan Gabriel to the Browns. Jalen Royals to the Chiefs. Gunnar Helm to the Titans. Jordan James to the 49ers. Shador Sanders to the Browns. Alec Aomanor to the Titans. Kyle Monangai to the Bears. Brashad Smith to the Chiefs. Torrey Horton to the Seahawks, and Will Howard to the Steelers. Got through the rest of that tier. Let's talk about a couple of these guys. Just pick a name that you would like to talk about, a guy that you find yourself potentially targeting in these late rounds.
So I think there's three running backs here that have the potential to be significant portions of their offense without an injury, without needing things to break their direction. I think Trevor Etienne, I think Jaden Blue, and I think Ollie Gordon all have potential to be fantasy relevant players without needing an injury, without any of that. Where starting from the back, Ollie Gordon, if he can lock down that goal line role and be that Dolphins goal line back and basically be your maybe your Raheem Mostert to Devon Achan, and so then touchdown equity is certainly potentially there. Jaden Blue, when you look at the Dallas backfield, he is the explosive player in that
Mm-hmm.
backfield, and they added Phil Maffa. They obviously signed Javante Williams. They added Miles Sanders, but when you really stack it up as a player that can create explosives, that if you want to play wide open within that offense, Jaden Blue is that player. And you could see him. He is primed, I feel like, to be like the drop a couple camp highlights. Holy cow, this guy's so fast, and be that rocket ship type player back here. And then Trevor Etienne, when you look at, we're kind of writing off Jonathan Brooks this year, and Chuba Hubbard is really the nominal back there. I know they added Rico Dowdle, but
Yeah.
what is really Rico Dowdle, whereas Trevor Etienne can kind of come in and be that pass catching back, that pass catching option for a complement to Chuba Hubbard and playing with Bryce Young there, I think that the potential is there for him as well to be an offensive role without needing an injury to create something.
And you talked about a few running backs. I want to talk about some running backs as well, because when you're at this point in your rookie drafts, that's what you should be doing, is drafting running backs. These are the guys that can spike in value quicker than anybody else. Woody Marks is a guy that I'm kind of surprised isn't getting a little bit more hype. I mean, this guy was a pass catching machine. He's also a very good pass blocker. And those two things are going to earn you an immediate role in college, or in the NFL. You look last year, Joe Mixon, great to start the season, and then just seemed to fall face first down the age cliff. Now, whether he can bounce back after an offseason to recover, still yet to be known. But Woody Marks is going to walk into. I've talked a lot about this Texans draft, how much I liked it, how much I like the vision, and he's going to be able to walk into a pretty good Texans offense here and have an opportunity to immediately carve out a role. So I do like Woody Marks quite a bit. And then Jarquez Hunter, not a guy that I expect much of anything from in 2025. But I do like him as a fourth or fifth round rookie pick, a guy that you can pick up and stash on your taxi squad for the sole reason that we don't know what the Rams are going to do long term at the running back position. But Kyron Williams is on the last year of his contract. They made an investment in Blake Corum last year. They went out and they drafted Jarquez Hunter. And I want to point out to both these guys that I'm talking about, Woody Marks and Jarquez Hunter, were drafted just a few picks after Cam Scadaboo and Bashal Tutin, two guys that we're really, really excited about. So while Jarquez Hunter's probably going to be a zero for a rookie, as we know most running backs are in Sean McVay's offense, I think that the long-term vision for him to potentially take over or maybe even split work with Blake Corum, I think they're going to try to test him out and see what he can do in this offense to try to avoid having to give a big contract to Kyron Williams in the future. So a guy that costs almost nothing, you could stash on your taxi squad, and maybe you find some gold in 2026.
you you know, I bumped Woody Marks up just as you were talking because I think you're exactly right, and I think that Woody Marks falls into similar category as those backs that I talked about. So good call out there. I think going through here, you've got some day two wide receivers that I think would be higher probably, but I would be worried about their role being relatively capped. Like Isaac Tisla is a guy that I think
Mhm.
his role might be a little bit capped. Same with Ty Felton, especially with those other receivers there. Pat Bryant's a guy that I was just wrong on, probably in my
Same.
ranks.
Yeah.
And then him landing in Denver there, I mean, he could be like the Courtland Sutton replacement, and he probably, arguably, if this is the valuation that you're seeing on Pat Bryant, kind of falling into round four, like that seems to me to be a guy that could be the kind of the rookie breakout of
I
these late wide receivers.
I just love that Sean Payton does not care about a consensus big board. Like, he is just going to get his guys. Last year, Bo Nix, where he went, I mean, that was shocking to so many people who saw that pick happen, but he did it and he didn't really care. And it worked out for him. This year, a lot of people said RJ Harvey was, a round three, round four, round five guy. He goes, I don't care. I'm taking him in round two. Pat Bryant was a guy that in consensus big boards was typically falling into the sixth, seventh round, and he still went out and got him. So, gotta love Sean Payton for just saying, you know what? I don't care about the consensus. I'm going to get the guys that I want on my team. And he just does it year in and year out.
Well, Detroit, I think, is another one of those teams that does that, and
Yeah.
Isaac Tesla is another one of those guys that, I mean, the testing was there, but I don't think many thought that. But and then really just digging late, guys that are barely even in here. Brashard Smith, a seventh round running back,
Yes.
and ordinarily you would just write off a seventh round running back, but when you stack up that Chiefs backfield, they need speed. And I made the comp in the rookie guide to the way that Jerick McKinnon was used because Jerick McKinnon was not used like a traditional running back, but that flashback to that end of that 2022 season, he was the running back two over the last 6 weeks because he got so much passing volume. And I think Brashad Smith, his wide receiver background and his speed that he can bring to the position, can kind of plug in and be that similar type there. Kyle Monangai sitting there as a potential
Hmm.
David Montgomery option of that power run game, that guy that's getting touchdown for the Bears. And then I got to mention my guy here, Will Howard, landing in Pittsburgh. I mean, that was a very, very late pick. But at the same time, you talk about a late day three, like Brock Purdy type option where this guy has played a ton of college football, obviously great success winning the national championship. You could see him coming into, if they don't add an Aaron Rodgers, coming into an otherwise very underwhelming Pittsburgh quarterback room and just grabbing the job. And he is the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers week 1. He's got that within a range of outcomes.
So Monungai wasn't a guy I was crazy about as a prospect. And even, his consensus grade was typically a round 7 guy, an undrafted guy, and he went in round 7. But man, that landing spot. You know who's ahead of him on the depth chart right now, Jeff?
DeAndre
DeAndre
Swift.
Swift and Roshan Johnson. That is
Yeah.
it. Like, there is not a lot of depth ahead of him right now. So you look, this is Ben Johnson coming into this offense and taking over. He clearly wanted a running back. We saw it with Travion Henderson, and then we saw multiple times in the drafts where there would be a running back run right before the Bears were up to pick, and then they would trade back. Like, it was almost like they were getting upset that they kept missing out on these running back runs. So there is one running back right now on the Bears depth chart that has been handpicked by Ben Johnson, and it's Kyle Monungai. Now, I'm not saying he's going to beat out Roshan Johnson and DeAndre Swift, but definitely something to keep an eye on, because everybody else, even Ian Wheeler, who was there coming back from the injury, these were all guys that were inherited by Johnson. So there's some murmurs that they might be in the market for J.K. Dobbins or Nick Chubb, but if not, they clearly saw something in Monungai that they liked enough to draft. So really, though, we're talking about all these different running backs here and the potentials for breakout, and I think that's the perfect note to close the show on. There's a lot of guys that we like early in these rounds, 1, 2, and 3. You can get different positions. I don't know about you, Jeff, but when I get to rounds 4 and 5, I'm almost exclusively drafting running backs in my rookie drafts.
Yep, I think that's the way to do it. And I think that even in this draft, when you look at the 3rd round, moving back and getting more capital and getting more shots in that 4th round, to just continue to take these running backs that we talked about within this tier.
Well, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Jeff Bell and I are going to continue coming out with this show every Tuesday and Thursday. You can find it right here, youtube.com/@footballguysdynasty. Be sure to sign up at footballguys.com so you can see all of the content that we have for our dynasty people like you. And then, Jeff, this is Tuesday, but coming out tomorrow, hopefully, we'll see. There might be a little delay here. Hopefully, I'm not under promising. Version 3 of our rookie guide. I don't know if you can see the bags under both of our eyes right now. Jeff and I have been working tirelessly through the weekend to make sure that this is ready for you. So you can get that at at footballguys.com/rookie guide. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.